Over the past few months, you may have heard of the term El Nino and how El Nino was expected to cause a wetter and colder winter for much of the southern United States. What you may not know is the 2015-2016 El Nino is among the strongest on record. And here to explain how El Nino is going to affect our winter here in Central Texas is our own forecaster, Sean Bellafiore. Well, thank you, Sean, for doing this little segment with me today, just to explain exactly what El Nino is for us that don't know what it is.
Yeah, El Nino is one of those things that in the meteorological community, it's very difficult to describe and it's very difficult to understand. So I'm going to try to break it down for you as best as I can.
Okay, because we've been hearing this term a lot over this past season, El Nino, El Nino.
It's one of those buzzwords. Like a couple years ago, it was the polar vortex.
Exactly.
Now it's El Nino. That's the big buzzword.
Exactly. So tell us a little bit about what El Nino is.
Well, I'll tell you that El Nino is not a storm system. If you've watched any of the big national news corporations saying El Nino is hitting California, well, that's not true at all. What El Nino is it's a warming of the East Pacific waters, and that has impacts on the global weather pattern, and specifically it impacts the United States a lot differently than it does impact other parts of the world. So we're going to jump into our computer graphics and I'll show you exactly what I mean. Normally we have the trade winds that move from east to west across the equator. That's what happens normally, and sometimes, usually about every 6 to 10 years, we see a weakening of the trade winds. Now, this causes a lot of warmer water from the western Pacific to move over to the eastern Pacific. When you have really warm waters in the eastern Pacific, what that'll do is that causes a lot more uplift in the atmosphere. So thunderstorms more easily form in the eastern Pacific, and what that does is it causes more wetter weather for much of the United States, more thunderstorms over the eastern Pacific, but the opposite in the western Pacific, where there's cooler waters and there's usually a drought. Typically, during an El Nino year, we see very strong warm waters in the eastern Pacific, and we've noticed that over the past couple of years. 1997 is kind of used as the benchmark for a strong El Nino. These are the sea surface temperature anomalies. In 2015, we saw very anomalously warm sea surface temperatures. Now, that is the reason why we're saying that El Nino is among the strongest on record, and usually during an El Nino, we see a cooler and wetter winter for much of the southern United States and a warmer and drier winter for the northern United States.
So is that where we're just kind of seeing this rain pattern throughout the winter? How do you think more it's going to affect us here in Central Texas?
Well, so far we haven't really seen too much of a direct impact. We've sort of seen some here in Central Texas. The bigger impacts have been in California, where they've had very serious flash flooding, and the flooding on the Mississippi River in Missouri, some of the key prime examples. Here, I still think we're going to see a little bit more of a cooler winter, not necessarily temperature-wise for big cold snaps. Usually El Nino means more clouds in our skies, which helps to keep our daytime temperatures down a little bit. So we're not seeing big cold snaps, just slightly cooler temperatures. And I know I'm saying that now when we have temperatures this week that are above average. And as for the wetter winter, that's still a possibility. El Nino is still strengthening and will likely continue to strengthen over the next couple of months before it starts to subside a little bit. I'm going to show you one really quick graphic on our weather system. Now, this is a look at the jet stream over the next couple of days. It's staying to our north, and over the weekend we're going to see another drop in the jet stream that will bring another cooler air mass into the Great Plains region. We're going to get some of that cooler air this weekend here in Central Texas, but the coldest weather stays away. As we go into the middle of next week, we're going to see the subtropical jet stream, which is where all of that energy from El Nino gets lifted up into the atmosphere. All the moisture goes into the atmosphere, so we're going to see a little bit more of a warmer weather pattern next week with more moisture moving in, so that means a little bit more rain, and then we're going to see a little bit of a drop in our temperatures behind that.
Well, definitely not complaining about this warm weather, but Sean, you say that El Nino is getting stronger. It's still around, but how much longer do you think El Nino is going to stick around for?
Well, El Nino usually only affects the wintertime months. During the summer, that's when we really don't see much of the effects because the whole entire northern hemisphere warms up because of the summer. It'll probably strengthen a little bit more, possibly becoming the strongest El Nino on record, and then some of the forecast models are saying that this will weaken as we go into the summer months and possibly even switch to a La Nina, which is the exact opposite effects and has different impacts for the United States.
Well, interesting. Well, we're going to have to bring you on back in the summer to talk a little bit about La Nina, right?
La Nina.
La Nina. All right.
I remember our L's and La's in Spanish.
There you go. There you go. Well, thank you so much, Sean, for explaining El Nino to us. For those of us that did not know, I really appreciate it.
Of course.
All right. And we'll be right back.